Francis Ngannou's going to the PFL, but not a single person on this planet cares anymore because the UFC just KO'd the PFL and finished them and buried them 6 feet under with the announcement of UFC 291. And honestly, guys, the timely fashion in which the UFC was able to announce this, it's either them playing 4D chess and they've had this card locked and loaded, ready to go for the past few weeks, and they were just waiting on Ngannou to announce his new signing with the PFL, or even crazier, and the thing that I would prefer to be true, is Dana White said, fuck it, let's go matchmakers, let's make these fights to hell as to whether or not these fighters are going to accept these matches. We'll pay them $1 million extra, and I bet they'll show up. That also might be it, although it probably isn't, but oh my goodness, this is an amazing card. One of the best cards I've seen in years, honestly. Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier fighting over one of the most undeserved BMF belts in the history of mankind. Both of these guys fight max once a year and do nothing but duck up-and-coming contenders. At least Justin Gaethje fought Rafael Fiziev. We'll get to that a little bit later, but the BMF belt, it's a joke anyway. The UFC just needed to put a stamp on it to make sure they could really put the cherry on top. I understand Jan Blachowicz and Alex Pereira. Pereira was buried by Adesanya 3 months ago. This is way too soon for him. Jan Blachowicz is one of the best strikers in all of MMA, but I can't wait to see that matchup because either man can win. We'll talk about that as well. Paulo Costa taking on Aleskadov. Tony Ferguson should be behind bars, but he's fighting Bobby Green. Wonder Boy's on the card as well. We have Derek Lewis on it. Guys, check the timestamps if you want me to talk about a specific fighter, because I'm going to have all of this in the timestamps, and at the end, I'm going to give my take on the Francis Ngannou situation as a whole. So let's just get right into it. The main event, Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. We understand it's going to be fireworks, without a doubt. The reason why the UFC can get away with making this a BMF fight is because their fight style, right? They're fighting fire on fire every time. But let's be honest, these guys fight once a year, once every year and a half. And when's the last time either of them actually took on a young, up-and-coming guy, except for Justin Gaethje fighting Rafael Fiziev? Like, I respect that a lot, but they're not BMFs. You want to talk about a BMF? Like, that's a guy like Gilbert Burns. That's a guy like Shavkat Rakhmonov. They'll just take whatever fights in front of them. That's a guy that's gone on record to say, dude, I'll literally riot if the UFC doesn't give me a title shot, after he had bounced off of one win after losing to Khabib. So the fact that this is a BMF fight is a bit of a joke. I can get over that. It's great that the UFC is going to have some shenanigan to go with it. It is what it is. Neither of these guys are ever going to become a champion, which is why I'm actually more excited for Pereira and Jan Blachowicz. But as far as my prediction goes for this fight, I'm actually going with Justin Gaethje, in part due to the fact that Justin Gaethje trains in Colorado at altitude. Dustin Poirier, he trains at American Top Team. And I understand Poirier finished Justin Gaethje a few years ago. Well, like, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago? I don't think that Dustin Poirier has changed that much. I think he's kind of accepted the fighter that he is and just settled into that role. Whereas I think Justin Gaethje has improved leaps and bounds since then. He really leveled up for the Fiziev fight. And I think Justin Gaethje, with the advantage of being able to get used to fighting at altitude in Colorado, I think he'll live up to the moment. I've been underrating him for a long time now, and I just think it's a good pick in this one. I feel like Poirier might underestimate him because he's already got a win over him. So I'm going to go with Gaethje. Again, a little bit disappointed in the fact that this card is in Salt Lake City. We're just simply not going to see the best versions of these guys. But let's get on to the next one. Alex Pereira and Jan Blachowicz. When I first saw this matchup, I thought it was too good to be true. This is one of those fights that in your head is just perfect. It's fireworks. Two of the best strikers to ever grace the sport of MMA. You know exactly what I've had to say about Jan Blachowicz, the most underrated fighter in the UFC. He's a nightmare for Alex Pereira, and Pereira got knocked out cold, stiffened up like a board against Adesanya 3 months ago. And I understand that a lot of you guys are going to be taking into account that the weight cut is one of the main reasons why Alex Pereira's chin was a little bit suspicious. I've watched a lot of his fights back in the day in kickboxing, and he was able to take shots better. I think it's also just due to the fact that he's older now. He's taken a lot of damage throughout his career. He doesn't have the best head movement, and It's just that his chin isn't all that great. Now, without a doubt, he's going to be a little bit tougher with the extra weight on him. But when's the last time we saw anyone get knocked out cold and come back 3 months later to have a really impressive performance, especially against one of the best strikers in the game that has a nickname, Polish Power, in Jan Blachowicz? Tai Tuivasa got smoked by Cyril Gane, came back 3 months later and got knocked out by Pavlovich. Bobby Green, that's a recent example. The guy, got KO'd by Drew Dober and looked awful in his next fight against Jared Gordon. I mean, that was one of the worst versions of Bobby Green that I've ever seen. So you pair that with the fact that Jan Blachowicz is really good at checking leg kicks. That's his bread and butter. Alex Pereira, his go-to, is eating away at your legs with the leg kicks. I mean, Pereira has the style where he kind of needs to break you down a little bit to eventually slow your movement down to find that left hook. He's not the fastest starter, whereas Jan Blachowicz, he is a fast starter. He's knocked out a lot of people in the early rounds. And I just feel like he also has the grappling advantage. He has the ability to shoot a blast double leg down the middle and to dominate Pereira down there. We've seen that Pereira, yes, he has decent takedown defense, but that's against Israel Adesanya. And when Adesanya did get him on the ground, he had his way with him. So I just think this is a nightmare matchup for Alex Pereira. I'm going to make a whole video on this, but it's also a 3-rounder. And again, with a style like Pereira's where you kind of need to methodically break someone down a little bit before setting up the left hook, especially against a high-level guy like Jan, I just don't like his chance in this one. I think that Jan can win a decision with his grappling. He can maybe finish Pereira with his grappling, and he could also knock him out. Pereira was KO'd badly just a few months ago. And Jan has a lot of power in his hands. He's a great counter striker, and good luck kicking his legs. I mean, he'll make you pay for it just by checking them. Both of these guys are going to have a brilliant battle in regards to how they're able to kick each other. That's something that I am going to be fascinated by, but I am going to choose Jan Blachowicz. Of course, Pereira can knock out anyone on this planet. You can never count him out. He's a phenomenal striker. But at the end of the day, it's one of those fights to where either guy loses, it's going to be rough. But I do hope that Alex Pereira can edge out the victory because I think I'm a little bit more of a fan of him, but I'm going with Jan. So let's get on to the next one. All right. Ikram Aliskerov just knocked out Phil Hawes, and the UFC is going to give him a Paulo Costa fight this quickly. Now, I've said it many times before. I think that Costa is extremely overrated. He doesn't have a single win on paper over anyone that's in the UFC. He's got these little T-Rex arms. He doesn't have that much power, and he gasses out. And guess what? He's back in Salt Lake City. And the funniest thing about this fight is that I wouldn't be surprised if Ikram Aliskerov gets a title shot before Khamzat Chimaev, which is just another reason as to why Khamzat has completely fucked his career. And I'm happy that I jumped ship from the Khamzat fan club because at the end of the day, it's just, what are you doing? You have Ikram Aliskerov getting your fights, getting closer to the belt. Izzy's lacking contenders. And if Ikram gets this win over Paulo Costa, he's probably next in line. And I think he's going to get it done. I understand Paulo Costa is a unit. I get it. He has good takedown defense. But Ikram Aliskerov, you just look at his tape. He's the next boogeyman in the division if Khamzat Chimaev ain't going to go up there. If he's going to go back down to 170, the guy is Ikram. And when it comes to the striking, we're talking about our guy Sloppy with the T-Rex arms with Paulo Costa. And I don't really think he'll be able to stand with Ikram for that long. And I'm thinking he's going to gas out and get finished, either by a submission on the ground or he'll get KO'd. At the end of the day, Paulo Costa is not at all taking his career that seriously. All Ikram does, like Khabib, like Islam, like all of these other guys that we talk about, train Allah. That's it. And you can't compete with that. Paulo Costa's out here spending the whole day filming a meme clip for his page, Secret Juice, where he's dressing up as Steve Jobs. That takes energy. Now, it's creative, and I love to see it, but he's not going to be able to compete at a high level anymore. Ever since he lost to Adesanya, he's completely changed. He has switched up big time in regards to his goals, going from wanting to be a world champion more than anything else to wanting to make as much money as possible, to fight as least as possible, and to also dedicate a lot of the time just to promoting yourself. But when it comes to winning, we'll see what happens. I'd rather just show up and get a guaranteed bag. That's kind of how I see Paulo Costa at this point. And I think that Ikram is going to step up in competition. This is one guy that will have a lot of skills in the middleweight division. And I'm excited to see the weeding out of all the frauds in the worst division in the UFC. I'm excited to get rid of the Costas. I'm excited to get rid of the, Dricus du Plessis and the Jared Cannoniers eventually. You know what I mean? I like the Ikram change. I like the Hamzat Chimaev teasing up to go into middleweight. So it's going to be a fun fight. Paulo Costa always comes to bang. He'll be tough as nails in the first round. He's always a spectacle to watch in the cage because of how big he is. He looks like a bodybuilder. And Paulo Costa always brings the meme. So I'm excited for that fight. Tony Ferguson and Bobby Green. Now, how come people aren't showing the same energy for Tony Ferguson that they were showing to Nate Diaz the other week, saying Nate Diaz should get locked up? Tony Ferguson just got into a DUI car crash. He should be behind bars, but instead the UFC is rewarding him with a fight. I understand I just made a whole documentary on Tony Ferguson and Yoel Romero, the Boogeyman documentary. Tony in his prime was just a different guy. At the end of the day, he's a shadow of his former self, Mr. Krabs without the body. He's a bodiless shell of Mr. Krabs, like a soulless man. I feel bad for him. At the end of the day, he put his life on the line, his health on the line to entertain us. I get it. I respect it. He's a legend. He should not be fighting. He should be behind bars. You need to have consequences for your actions. We shouldn't condone that behavior of someone just saying, fuck it, I'll go out to a club, drink and drive, and whatever happens, happens. Hope you still root for me, though. If your mom, your dad, your cousin, whatever, was in a car next to Tony Ferguson that night, you'd probably change your mind. But on top of that, Tony Ferguson is an old man. I mean, this guy went from being one of the most dangerous, feared guys in the lightweight division, out of all the divisions you could even bring up, the most stacked division that there is, to losing to Nate Diaz when Nate Diaz was even older than him, I think. And he was doing all right in that fight, but he's just not the same. He doesn't have the testosterone anymore. Ever since the Gaethje fight, he hasn't had the wherewithal. And I understand Bobby Green is the most entertaining guy in the game, and I absolutely love Bobby Green, and I'm going to try to get him on the channel. I want to interview him. Ever since the Ariel Helwani interview after he headbutted Jared Gordon, he's my new favorite personality. But that being said, Green didn't look that great against Jared Gordon. That was the worst he's ever looked. I think Green is going to smoke him. I think that Bobby Green, even though he is starting to slide down, he has the much better boxing. He still has a lot of muscle on him. He still is explosive. I just think Green's going to smoke Tony, and it's just going to be sad. So at the end of the day, unless it's a red panty night in Conor McGregor, I think it's kind of evil to even get Tony in the cage to begin with. I don't want to see him fight. And I know some of you guys are going to be hating on me in the comments. Dude, I don't give a fuck. It's the same thing with the Robbie Lawler fight on UFC 290. I understand Robbie's a legend. He's no longer that guy in the cage. He shouldn't even be fighting, all right? And they aren't that entertaining to watch when they don't have it anymore, when they're just old geezers that are just chucked out in the octagon and they don't even know where they are. Michael Chiesa versus Kevin Holland, excellent matchup. Grappler versus striker. I don't think it should be on the main card. I'd much rather Wonderboy versus Michel Pereira to be on the main card because as far as I'm concerned, and let's be real, Michael Chiesa doesn't exactly bring fireworks to mind. He's not that entertaining of a fighter. He fights every decade, as it seems, and Kevin Holland is lost to a bunch of grapplers. I'm going to go with Michael Chiesa in this one. But again, why is it on the main card? Kevin Holland didn't even look that good in his last fight. He was actually losing to old man Santiago Ponzinibbio until he found the knockout. Wonderboy versus Michel Pereira. I can't wait to see that. That should be amazing. Derek Lewis is on the prelims as well. Salt Lake City, guys. What do you think about that? I'm not a fan of going back to Salt Lake City. It's not the best place to have fights. I'd much rather them be fighting anywhere else. We saw what happened last time. A lot of fighters gassed out. Leon Edwards, the champion, looked terrible in Salt Lake City. We're going to have to take that into account when we go with these predictions. Now, let's get to the Francis Ngannou situation. This is how I look at it. Francis Ngannou won. When it comes to the war, the UFC won the war. The fans, me, I also won the war. A lot of people think that the fans are losing out by Ngannou not going back with the UFC. No, I'm happy that Ngannou's gone. I don't want Ngannou stinking up the heavyweight division and holding it up, fighting once every 5 years. Screw that. But you cannot deny that Francis won in this situation, and the PFL is probably going to go broke. So that's how I view it. The UFC won the war. They're not going to have to deal with Francis Ngannou anymore. He was demanding that he wanted to box and fight in the UFC. Like, get out of here with that. You can't be the UFC heavyweight champion of the world and also compete in another sport. You have to represent the big time promotion. That's your duty. You have to be a good representative, a good ambassador of the sport. The PFL is going to let him box. That's what he wanted. So Francis Ngannou is able to box while being in the PFL. He's going to get guaranteed $8 or $9 million, which is amazing. It's just about as good as what he would have gotten in the UFC, but pair that with the freedom of being able to box, pair that with the freedom of being on the chair, board, whatever you want to call it, of the PFL. It's a win for Ngannou, all right? What he really wanted was he didn't want to feel like he was held back. And let's be honest, guys, if Francis Ngannou lost to Jon Jones and he stayed in the UFC would have made it hard for him to really excel and get what he wants. He would never have a chance at being a star. And I understand he's getting a share of the pay-per-views. Not a single soul on this planet is going to buy a PFL pay-per-view. I'll never buy a PFL pay-per-view. No one's going to tune in live. He's going to be fighting Daliha, whatever the champion's name is in the PFL. No one cares about that. But at the end of the day, he's still getting his money. He's still getting his way. You cannot sit here and deny that Francis Ngannou did well in this situation. It doesn't matter if he's going to fight Jon Jones. Why would you want him to stay in the UFC if he's going to fight once every millennium? Like, fuck that. I am happy. He was a burden at this point. I'd rather Sergey Pavlovich, the hungry man from Russia who doesn't speak English and doesn't care about all the drama. He just wants to get in the cage and fuck people up. That's what I like. I like the guy in, Jon Jones that just came back and is willing to make a turnaround to fight Stipe out of the retirement home. I get it. Stipe's old, but it's better than nothing. Jailton Almeida. I mean, just imagine how hungry this man is. He only has 137,000 followers on Instagram, and he's one fight away from a title shot. This guy is far from making it, Jailton. He's from the slums of Brazil. I'd rather Jailton Almeida and Sergey Pavlovich being at the top of the UFC heavyweight division, fighting 3 times a year, than Francis Ngannou fighting Jon Jones, maybe losing, making a turnaround the next year, also getting, not the pay that he wants. It is what it is, man. He's going to fight in boxing. He's got the big bag now, and he also has the freedom. Good for him. The PFL is going to take a loss. I don't know how the heck they have this kind of money, because no one is buying a PFL pay-per-view, and he won't really get a lot of pay-per-view points because of that. People will tune in to YouTube the next day to watch the highlights, which is probably what I'll do. At the end of the day, it's not like, wow, I can't wait to see the 5-round war with Francis Ngannou. It's more of like, I'll watch the 5-second KO clip on YouTube the next day. I can deal with that. The fights are usually going to end pretty quickly. And in regards to his legacy, I think Francis Ngannou will be just fine. All right, he beat Stipe Miocic, the heavyweight GOAT. He always has the bragging rights in regards to that. And so what if he beats a couple of cans in the PFL? He doesn't even have to stick around for that long, and at least he could get a big boxing fight. So I don't think Francis really gives a shit about that. And as I said, he was a burden to deal with. I'm happy that he's not in the UFC anymore, but you can't deny that he won, and good for him. He got what he wanted. He got, his future opponent $2 million guaranteed. He's going to get the same amount of money he would have gotten in the UFC, but now he'll be able to box too. The legacy is the one thing he doesn't get, but again, I don't think he cares. And this will motivate fighters in the future to cross over to the PFL, big time fighters. But again, how the hell is the PFL going to stay in business when they're paying Francis millions of dollars? They're letting Francis stiff arm them, run off to boxing, maybe not even come back, be hard to deal with in the future for them too. It just seems like it's a bad move on their behalf, honestly. It's a big L for the PFL. It's a big win for the UFC in the long run. And it's also a win for Francis Ngannou. So that's my take on the situation. I feel like you can't just be like, it's L for Ngannou and a win for the UFC, or it's a win for the PFL and a win for Ngannou. It's a complex issue. It is what it is. Guys, I uploaded a documentary on boogeymen where I talk about Tony Ferguson and Yoel Romero, the most feared men in combat sports history. The link is in the description, or just go to my channel and you'll see it. I put a lot of effort into this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to be making full videos on each of these fights on UFC 291. Until next time.